I almost got kidnapped but didn't realize it until years later. Reddit. What is something catastrophic that has almost happened to you? Finding out from an auntie from my dad's side that my parents were going to let my mum's sister and husband adopt me as a baby because they were childless for a long time. If the transaction happened, it would have been kept a secret. Thank goodness it never happened. The woman is a nutcase and the husband ended up divorcing her after they had a son. Their kid grew up whacked and feral, and my parents became his guardian. The poor kid didn't even know how to wipe his butt and had to be spoon-fed at age 10. This isn't something catastrophic that happened to me, but still interesting. I'm 16 years old, and last year when I was walking home from school, I saw two little kids that couldn't be older than 9 were walking home a little bit in front of me. I assumed they were brother and sister. Anyway, me being so much bigger with longer legs, I eventually started to catch up to them, and right when I was about to turn off into my street, I noticed a car pulled up next to them and asked them to get in. My heart stopped when I heard the older one say, "But mister, we don't know you." After that I kept walking towards them and screamed out Lucy, Mark, because I didn't know their actual names, and they both looked at me. I ran up and said, "Guys, don't run off on me like that. Stay close." I pretended like I didn't see the car pulled up next to them and walked with them until the car drove off. They asked me who I was, but I just kept telling them to be quiet until the man goes away. When the guy left, I told them not to talk to strangers and walked them home. I explained to their parents what happened, and I don't think I've ever seen more grateful parents. First, let it be known that I have a gift curse where people feel like they can tell me their life story. Strangers, especially. I rode the city bus from a ghetto part of town to Homelessville, where I had to transfer to home. There were a few regulars, but every now and then there'd be someone new and inevitably they'd sit next to me. I was at the transfer bus stop with 3 other people. An old man who spoke no English, so I'd never spoken to, this twitchy gangbanger who had gotten on the first bus a few stops after I did. Then there was a man in a suit. He looked like the love child of successful black guy in The Rock. He sat next to me and started a conversation. I don't remember what exactly it was, but something about his line of questioning creeped me out. On the surface it wasn't anything like "What color are your panties, little girl?" and aside from sitting wide too close, he didn't try to touch me. Maybe I was just too wary of strangers, but I just didn't want to talk to him and I hoped he got onto another bus. However, I was raised to be polite and couldn't think of a way to tell this guy to please stop talking to me. Then twitchy gangbanger plops down next to me on my other side. Also too close. Now I'm sandwiched between 2 guys and Twitch was almost leaning over me. He starts talking loud and fast, rambling and mumbling to where I can't understand a word. A creepy guy eventually gets up to go stand next to no English, but I still have Twitch. Twitch then proceeds to tell me his life story. He claimed to be in the Crips and I thought he was saying this to appear tough, though he was flying the right colors. He then talked about his role in the gang and how his dealer ripped him off earlier that day. He was pointing to scars on his arm and face and explaining how he got them. My bus came and we all climbed onto it. Creeper had basically given up talking to me and sat somewhere near the front of the bus while Twitch followed me to the back. He wasn't close as he had before, so I'd calmed down ever so slightly. It also helped that I was sitting next to a regular who was blind, so if push came to shove I could whip Twitch with the cane. He kept up the constant monologue and didn't stop until Creeper got off the bus. Twitch then says, I'm quoting, "So excuse the language, I thought that F was never gonna leave," and runs off. Before he does, I hear him asking the driver the quickest route to get back to where we'd been picked up. I went home and, using the location and minute hours, found that Creeper was a convicted sex offender. A month later I saw a very familiar mugshot in the paper. Twitch was arrested for murder. Even people that kill people have a moral code. Mine was a few months after I'd turned 21. I'm from India and frequently make trips from my house in Bombay to one in another state around 1,000 kilometers away. It's a 20-hour journey because I prefer buses over trains. I've been doing it for over 15 years and always booked the exact same seat, 4 seats down from the driver on his side. This particular time though, I booked my ticket late and instead got a seat on the opposite side of the bus. We just stopped for dinner, and once done, I got back to my seat and settled down with a book. As soon as we turned back onto the highway, there was a big thud and a lot of dust and glass flying around. Turns out a truck rammed into the side of the bus. No one was hurt more than a few scratches. However, in my usual seat, there was a lady, about 5 feet tall, and there was a huge block of wood that was stuck over her head. If I'd gotten that seat, I'd have been decapitated. Was quite a WTF moment, and gave me some perspective on life. Seriously, what the frick is going on with buses in India? When I was about 7 years old, my twin, an older brother, and I had gone with a family friend to go to his mother's house. This was nothing out of the ordinary, as we had gone with this man on several such occasions prior. We were living somewhere in Nevada at the time, the California border. He had asked my parents if it was okay for him to take the 3 of us for a visit, and my parents said yes. I'm not really sure at what time we left, but we never made it to his mother's house. I was looking forward to seeing her cat again. We drove for hours, my brother, sister and I in the back seat. This man didn't stop to let us out for a bathroom break, and he didn't have anything other than beer for us to drink, and he was drinking as well. After another hour or so of driving, he got pulled over. He told us not to say anything to the officers. They approached his vehicle and could smell the beer coming off of him in waves. They noticed us in the backseat and asked if we were his. He of course said yes. The officers didn't believe him. Thank God. They asked him to step out of the car and placed him under arrest. He fought them the entire time until they had clubbed him into submission just to get him into the back of the cruiser. Another CHP showed up and took us with him to a foster home where we stayed until our parents could come to pick us up later. It wasn't until 15 years later that I had learned that the man had pedophilic intentions with the 3 of us. I never thought anything of the fact that he didn't bring another of my brothers with us. When the officers asked him why that was, he simply replied that the other brother would have talked. I was looking forward to seeing her cat again. Forever a Redditor. I was born in Boynton Beach, FL, and spent my first few years in a home that skirted some really rough neighborhoods. Though the houses on my street were mostly low income and minority families who were just trying to raise their kids, occasionally we'd have some break-ins or gang fights overflow into our community. For a span of a few years we had a crack-addicted homeless man who would hit our neighborhood for easily pawnable goods to support his habit. The cops always knew it was him, would lock him up for a few months, and then when released he'd be at it again. I was really young, just under 3 years old the night he broke into our house for the second time. He woke me up as he was shining a flashlight into my bedroom window looking for an easy way in, and Moy, being the headstrong toddler that I was, got up to investigate the policeman's flashlight, as I later told my mom. Apparently I must have scared the crap out of him when I sleepily greeted him as he came in through our kitchen window, because he abandoned all intention of robbing our home and instead picked me up to rock and soothe me back to sleep, laid me down on our living room couch, and hightailed it through our rear door. I had forgotten the whole incident completely by the time my mom retold me the story later in life, and initially was freaked out by my 3-year-old description of the scary man with the long fingernails. However, I look back at it now with a level of humility. It could have been someone else much meaner and a far more tragic situation. This man, who was bottom of the totem pole by most societal standards, addict, homeless, petty theft, was still a human being who chose to be gentle with a child. In some ways it restored my faith in humanity. In a strange way, this is the nicest story in this thread. He just wanted drug money, but he wasn't a complete degenerate. I was driving down a country road at night. I saw a dazing sign and decided to slow down significantly for the upcoming blind corner. Came around the corner going about 20 km per hour as opposed to the 80 km per hour posted limit. In the middle of the fricking road is some idiot walking and wheeling his bicycle. I stopped about 3 inches shy of hitting him. If I had been doing 80 I would have had to dig a grave. I love how you go right past would have had to call the cops, fill out lots of paperwork, right to dig a grave. LOL. Sort of similar situation. When I was in kindergarten, a man I didn't recognize came to walk me home. Being as stupid as I was, I grabbed my bags and went with him. I'm not sure how, but he even knew my name, I think. We chatted and he walked me home, and as I walked through the doors my parents ran to me. Turns out they were looking for me everywhere, thinking I had been kidnapped. My teacher had told them that I left with a man claiming to be a relative. To this day, nobody knows who the man was that walked me home. Well, it appears he actually wanted to walk you home. When I was around 9 I went roller skating with my older friends who were around 12 years old. We had just skated out of our neighborhood area when I realized that I forgot something. So I skated home, which was literally 2 minutes away, got whatever and headed back. I find out that my two friends had crossed this small road while I was gone and had gotten hit by a driver who ran the red light. It was a hit and run. It was especially sad because one was a long-time ballet dancer and she was never able to recover from it. Wow, that's still pretty traumatic. I'm glad nobody died. Years ago I was walking on the sidewalk during one of those Silent Hill days that San Francisco has sometimes. The entire world filled with fog, every sound muffled. Still on the sidewalk, I turned to cross the street and paused for absolutely no reason with my hand up in front of me and felt something tingle on my fingertips. Something flat and yellow appeared and then disappeared in front of me in a flash at hip level without making a sound. It took me about 10 seconds to realize that what I had just seen was a taxi cab, streaming by at about 50 miles per hour, that had been unable to see the road and had driven onto the sidewalk. The tingle I felt in my fingertips was my hand touching the side of the passenger's side window. I don't always get lucky, but when I do, I almost die. Mom and I were coming home from the mall when I was 10. My mom says that she thinks the car behind us is following us. She makes a series of random turns, and the guy is still behind us. She sees a cop car sitting in the parking lot of a grocery store, so she pulls into the parking lot and drives up to the cop. The man then hightails it around us and out of the parking lot, flipping us off as he passes us. I'm still curious as to why he was following us. He was waiting for that sweet moment when he could pass you and flip you off. When I was about 3 or 4 years old, I was watching TV in the basement with my dad while my mom was out with her friends. We heard the door open upstairs and someone walking around. My dad told me to go upstairs and say hi to my mom, and being lazy, I refused. A few hours later my mom did come home and she asked my dad if he had moved some of the stuff in our house, because it was missing. We had been robbed. If I hadn't been so lazy, I would have gone upstairs and that guy might have taken me too. He also might have seen that someone was home and fled, but the other option is really scary to think about. I was four-wheeling with some friends up in the Rocky Mountains last summer. I'm not from the US and this was my first time, so I was just a passenger. Everything was going normal, at least as normal as I think, yelling yahoo while listening to the Team America soundtrack. When we took a turn a little too sharp and high-centered on the edge of a cliff, it was like slow motion as we slowly crept toward the edge and I decided to put on my seatbelt. The car got stuck on a mound but wouldn't move backwards. I think the mound was the only thing that slowed us down enough not to go off the cliff. We were literally an inch away from plummeting to our doom, while America, Frick yeah, was blasting through the speakers. We don't let Corey drive anymore. I hope you see this, Corey. You are an awful driver. I was 19 years old, traveling by car alone through some pretty isolated small towns. No cell phone. My trip was about 9 hours, and when you drive for that long you end up driving with the same traffic for a while. There was a truck that had passed me and then slowed down to the point where I passed it over and over. I was a little annoyed, but other than that didn't think too much of it. When I pulled over into a small gas station, it pulled over behind me, but didn't drive up to a pump. As I stood there while the gas pump ran, I noticed a man in the truck watching me, but didn't return the stare. I went into the shop to pay for my gas. As the cashier was putting my payment through, he looked surprised at something behind me. I turned around and my body felt like it could jump out of my skin. The man from the truck was standing close behind me, close enough to touch me by bowing his head. He didn't move, just stared. I walked around him and went to the restroom. I locked the door to the restroom as well as the store door. When I opened the door he was standing there, waiting. As I walked to my car, he followed me. I stood at my locked car, keys in hand, looking at the man, who was just a few feet behind me, in the reflection in the window. We stood there like that, him staring and me waiting to unlock my door. I was afraid that if I unlocked the door he'd do something crazy like push me in and take off. What was probably almost a full minute later, he slowly walked around to the front of my car and said, "You be careful out there," before getting back into his truck. I got in my car, locked the door and waited. He didn't move his truck to pull out until I moved my car. I got ready to pull out back onto the highway, waited until a chain of a few big slow logging trucks were about to pass, then pulled out quickly in front of them, nearly cutting them off, before gunning my poor little car's engine to speeds it had never before been and has never been since. I hoped that I would run into police and get pulled over, but I did not. This was near a piece of highway where women have gone missing along it. Didn't happen to me, but my mom. She was a college student in the 70s in Oregon walking out to her car late one night. A handsome brown-haired man comes up and starts talking to her while she's walking out. At first he was very polite, then he began to seem more aggressive, creepy, and making her more and more nervous. She starts yelling. A car comes into the parking lot, so she takes the opportunity and runs to her car. A couple years later she sees Ted Bundy on the news and swears it was him that night. 1/5 through this story I had a feeling it was Bundy. When I was very young, probably 1-2, my biological father hired someone to kill my mother and I so that he could leave the country. We lived in Europe, and you couldn't just leave without your wife, kids, and he didn't want to pay alimony. Fortunately, my biological father lied to the guy to convince him to do it and said that my mother was awful and that I was a brat. The would-be murderer saw us in a park and decided to warn my mother at a party he knew they'd both be at later on. I wandered away from my mother briefly at an outdoor market and this middle-aged, heavy-set guy grabbed me with no warning and tried to drag me into his van 10 feet away. I was a scrawny kid, so it almost worked, too. Screamed my head off for help. He took off running. For years I thought that this was just something that happened to most kids. Fricked me up a bit when I realized just how close I came to being kidnapped. I think some parents refuse to imagine something bad happening to their kids and would prefer to call their kid a liar than accept something horrible could have happened to their child. A friend of mine was abused and her mom thinks she made it up and will likely never believe her. Her younger sister had a stalker and the mom again said she made up the story. Crazy mom. When I was little, somewhere between 8 and 11, my dad forced me to join Girl Scouts. We had to wear uniforms to meetings, and I got stuck with the dress version that didn't reach much past my knees. Usually, this wasn't a problem. Then one day we out for some kind of hike or nature walk, in winter, in Ontario. I don't remember how long the walk was supposed to be, but I was getting really cold and very upset. I had a coat, but no snow pants. My mom was there as a volunteer, and I kept telling her it was too cold and I wanted to go home. Mom agreed and told the group leaders we were leaving early. Now my mom didn't have a car, but we lived relatively close by, so we started walking home. To cut a lot of time off our walk, we tried taking a shortcut across a golf course. The snow turned out to be a heck of a lot deeper than we expected. I could barely walk through it despite being very tall for my age, and it was almost up to my mom's waist. My mom's health had never been great, and when we were out in the middle of it, she realized she couldn't keep walking. We were stuck out there, alone, with no cell phone, and no one waiting at home expecting us back. My parents were divorced and my dad was living in Quebec at the time. It was getting dark and still freezing cold. Luckily, there were some houses within sight of the golf course. Mom stood in the snow and prayed while I waded across the golf course and into the nearest neighborhood. I ran up to the first house I saw and rang the doorbell. Then the scary part happened. No one answered. I tried another house, ringing the bell and pounding on the door. No answer. The street was completely empty, but there were houses on both sides. I turned around and screamed, as loud as I could, "Somebody help me!" No one heard me scream. So I went to the third house and rang the bell. And finally, someone answered. I started babbling to a random stranger about how my mom was out on the golf course and needed help. He ran out to get her, while I sat on the staircase inside. His daughter was nice and gave me a pair of her socks, black with red toes and red dogs around the ankles, since mine were soaked through with melted snow at this point. The man found my mom and drove us both home. I never heard the guy's name and I've never seen him or his family since. But I still have the socks his daughter gave me, and I'm never going to throw them out. You have been visited by the strong skeleton. He wants you to like this video and have a good week. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.